Hi class, welcome back to baking school. Now we are currently on lesson 9 of the Baking Fundamentals course, and today we are going to talk all about leavening. Now if you've ever baked anything before, you're probably somewhat familiar with the concept of leavening, but today I want to dive in deep into what leavening actually is and all of the different ways our baked goods can be leavened. So leavening refers to the gases that are trapped inside of our baked goods as they are baked. Now this is what makes our baked goods rise, what makes them spread out, and also what keeps things tender and fluffy. Now there are 3 different categories of leavening used in baking. There is chemical leavening, there is biological leavening, and there is physical leavening. So let's review each type and how it functions in baking. So first let's talk about our chemical leavening agents, and these are baking soda and baking powder. Now the way these two things work is when they are added into our doughs and batters, a chemical reaction occurs that creates carbon dioxide gas. Now this gas gets trapped in our baked goods and what makes them rise. Now there is some differences between baking soda and baking powder. Now baking soda, which is also known as bicarbonate of soda or sodium bicarbonate, is alkaline on the pH scale. So in order for it to work and have that chemical reaction, it needs an acidic ingredient to react with. So a few common ingredients used in baking that are acidic include brown sugar, chocolate, buttermilk, molasses, and lemon juice. Now baking powder is actually baking soda already combined with another acidic ingredient. So when baking powder is hydrated, it already will begin reacting, and it can be used in any recipe because it does already have that acidic ingredient present in it. Now baking soda and baking powder work very quickly. They will begin producing that carbon dioxide gas almost immediately when they are hydrated, and so they need to be baked pretty much immediately after they go into a dough or a batter. Now I actually have a very detailed article on my website all about baking soda and baking powder and how they function in baking, so I'll leave the link for that for you in case you're interested. Now moving on to our next form of leavening, which is yeast, and this is considered a biological leavening. Now the reason why we call this a biological leavening is because it is actually a living organism. It is actually a fungus. Now the way yeast works is it feeds on sugars and starches present in the doughs or batters it's in, and as it feeds, it also produces that carbon dioxide gas as well as alcohol. Now this process of the yeast feeding and producing gases is called fermentation, and it is what makes yeast doughs rise. So in contrast to baking soda and baking powder working very quickly to produce the carbon dioxide gas, yeast produces this gas very slowly and over a long period of time. So in order for the dough to contain that gas, it needs to have a lot of structure and elasticity. So this is why yeast dough is needed over a long period of time to create that really strong and elastic gluten structure so that it can contain the gases that the yeast is producing. Now you can actually see this in progress in this time-lapse video of my yeast dough rising. So what is happening is the yeast is feeding, it is creating those gases, and the dough is gaining volume, which is leavening the dough. Now this is called the fermentation process. So the last type of leavening is physical leavening. Now this is the type of leavening that happens just from air and steam. So air is used really frequently in baking as leavening, and you can most commonly see this by when you cream butter and sugar together. So this process of beating together solid fat with sugar traps tiny little pockets of air in between the ingredients. Now this pocket of air adds volume to our baked goods. Now you can also see air being used as leavening when you beat egg whites into a meringue or when you beat cream into whipped cream. Now steam is the other form of physical leavening used. Now the way this works is ingredients such as milk, butter, and eggs all contain water, and that is going to evaporate in the oven, causing steam. Now this might not seem quite as exciting as the chemical reaction that happens with baking soda and baking powder, but actually when water turns to steam, it increases in volume by 1,500 times. So it can really produce a great deal of volume in our baked goods. Now, one of the best examples of how steam is used as leavening in baking is with puff pastry. The way puff pastry is made is with many alternating layers of dough and butter. So when that dough is baked, all of the water that is present in the butter is going to evaporate off, which creates a great deal of volume and puff to the puff pastry. Now, another example of this is when making a Dutch baby pancake. So if you've ever made one before, there is no chemical leavening in it, no baking powder, no baking soda, but there is a great deal of liquid in the batter. So when this batter hits a very hot oven, it's going to quickly evaporate off, and you can see here the great amount of puff that happens when this Dutch baby is baked. So now that you understand all about how leavening works in baking, I want to give you your homework assignment. So I'd really like for you to try making choux pastry for this assignment. So if you've never made choux pastry before, it is a staple in baking because it can be used to make so many different things, like cream puffs, profiteroles, eclairs, French crouliere donuts, and even a French-style gnocchi. Now, choux pastry is such a great example of how powerful steam can be as leavening. If you've never made choux pastry before, I think you're really going to be surprised at how much volume you are going to gain just from the water evaporating out of the dough as it bakes. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.